In this video, we're going to take a look at something called nesting. Now, nesting basically will move all of your parts around and find the best fit for them on the sheet of material that you're using. And it basically is to save material. Okay, so it saves wasting them. So let's say, for instance, I drew something like that, and like that, and like that. And then I went to machine this, and I machined those three pieces. You can see on the right hand side that my sheet that I have is a 2x4 sheet. I machined these squares or these rectangles, and basically most of the sheet is going to be scrap apart from these areas on the bottom right and at the top left. Okay, and it's not really very economical to be doing something like this. What you would normally do on something basic like this is just grab that and then just move it so it's somewhere near. Grab that, move that again. You can also use the arrow keys on the keyboard to do that, by the way. So you would move it down so it gets somewhere near. Now, if you've got quite a complex sort of shape, then it becomes a bit time consuming. Okay, so what you would use then is use nesting, and basically the computer or the program would automatically find the best fit for you to fit within the sheet, and it saves you having to spend hours slowly aligning everything so you can get the best fit, so the material, there's less wastage on there. Okay, so what I'll show you is, first of all, just very basic nesting. Okay, so let's delete those two that I have there, and I've just got this one square. Okay, let's say that I want to put this over most of this sheet, or first of all I want to do it to a specific amount. Okay, now I don't know whether that will go over the whole sheet or not. So to use nesting, select this icon here for nest selected vectors. So if I click on it, let's make sure that I've got it selected. What I need to do is just enter at the top a tool diameter. Okay, so that's the tool that I'm going to use to cut these parts out. So let's say that I'm going to use a 1/4 inch tool. The toolpath clearance, that's basically the gap between each part. Now, there are a couple of things to consider here. Is if you were to set that at 0, I've seen lots of people do that, so it won't leave any material in there, and it will just basically machine all the material out. One thing to consider is how it's going to be held then. If you're, let's say for instance, taping the parts down or something to the bed, then you could probably get away with this and it would be fine. If you're not doing that and you're relying on, let's say, tabs or bridges to hold the part in there so it don't fly off or gouge into the part, then if you set the toolpath clearance to 0, it won't actually have any material on there to create a bridge or a tab. So it won't sort of have a skeleton left. Okay, so what I would advise to do is maybe use that, especially if, let's say for instance, you've got a bit of a gap at the top of the sheet or at the side of the sheet, you might as well use it up. Okay, so for the toolpath clearance, let's say that I'm going to do 1 inch. Okay, it's probably a little bit excessive, but let's just see what it does. Edge clearance basically means the clearance around the edge of the sheet. Now, this is useful if, say for instance, you haven't put your sheet on perfectly square to the table. Okay, so let's say it's sticking in a little bit down the bottom right here, and when you come down to this edge, if you had that set at 0 and this was sticking in, when it came round, it would cut and it would just start cutting fresh air. You'd have a scrap piece. Okay, so what I tend to do is maybe put that at, let's say, 1/2 inch, just to make sure that I've put the piece on square and I haven't really got to worry about it too much. Now the part rotation, I'm going to turn that off for a moment, and I'm not going to worry about any of these settings except that I want to nest from the bottom left. So that's down here, that's my datum, that's okay. And I want to nest in X, so it comes down the table, okay? Don't worry about curve tolerance for this, and I need to make sure that I've got use model as boundary, okay? Now the reason being, if I didn't have that, then it wouldn't be able to nest properly, because I want to nest across the whole of this sheet, and it's just saying that the model size is the boundary of what I want to create. Okay, so I'm not going to worry about any of these, and I'm just going to say that I want, let's say, 5 parts. Okay, so I've entered 5 in there. Sheets, it says maximum number of sheets 999. Okay, so it's just basically saying just fill as many sheets as you like, as long as I get 5 parts. So if I click nest, you can see that it created the 5 parts that I wanted. So if I zoom in, you can see that it's given me the edge clearance. So if I measure these now, so if I go to model and then measure tool, and I click there and then click somewhere near there, you can see that it's 1/2 inch. Now if I click here, from there to there, this won't actually be 1 inch. Okay, so even though I put the toolpath clearance as 1 inch, it's coming out at 1.25. Now the reason being is that it adds on the tool diameter to this. Okay, so if we want to change that and make them smaller, let's say for instance, if I cancel that and undo that, and then let's change the clearance to be, let's say, 1/2 inch, and the edge clearance, let's put that at something like 0.1 and select nest. Now you can see that this is a lot closer to the edge, and it's also closer here to each other. I've been doing 5 parts. Let's say I undo that, and let's say I wanted to do 100 parts. Select nest, and you can see that it's nested over this sheet. Now you may be wondering that there's no way it's that 100 parts on there. What's happened is that this has gone over multiple sheets, and we're actually looking at the last sheet. So if we go to the 2D view and take a look at this, you'll be able to see all the sheets. So if you take a look under here, we've got sheet 1 and sheet 2. So if I were to switch to sheet 1, you can see that that's filling up the sheet. Sheet 2 is just going so far because I've specified that I wanted 100. Now if I undo that, and let's say I wanted 120 and nested that, you can see that sheet 1 has got exactly the same amount in there. It's got 2 copies. So if I make this a bit of a weird number, let's say 118, and nest that, you can see that I've got sheet 1 is full, sheet 2, I'm just coming up to there, and I've got the 2 missing. Okay, if I go to the 2D view and zoom out, I can see all of the sheets. Okay, and I can switch between them like so. Now, what if I had different parts? Okay, so let's undo that, and let's go back to the 3D view, and I'll just create, let's say, a star. Okay, like so. Okay, so let's say select all of those and all parts 118 still. Okay, select nest. Okay, so what's happening, I've got 4 sheets, but I've got 3 copies of sheet 3. Okay, so sheet 1 looks like that, sheet 2 like that, sheet 3, I have 3 different copies of this because I want 118 of these stars. And then on sheet 4, I've just got that many stars. Okay, now what if I wanted, let's say, only a handful of these stars and a certain amount of the squares? Let's undo that. So rather than doing all parts, I'm going to put that back to 1. Okay, let's select the star. Okay, and I want, let's say, 26 of these. And you can see that the number on the inside of it changes to 26. So this is telling me it's going to do 26 copies of this. Now the square, let's say I wanted 10 of those. And you can see that it's changed to 10. Now if I select both of those, it gives you the numbers. So I've got 10 copies of the square or the rectangle and 26 copies of the star. So if I now nest that, you can see that it's spread over 2 sheets. Okay, so I've got 5 stars there. Go back to sheet 1, then I've got 10 of the rectangles, and I should have however many of the stars. That's how you can do specific amounts of different parts. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the settings. So let's undo that. And you can see that I'm back to my stars and the square. Okay, so you notice that when I did nest this, if I do it again, you can see that I've got these 5 stars. And it seems like a bit of a waste, to be completely honest. I don't really want these to go over onto the next sheet. If I take a look at sheet 1, there's lots of space on there that's not really being utilised. Okay, so I'm going to play around with the settings and see if we can get some of those stars, or maybe all of those stars, onto this sheet. Okay, so let's undo that and let's take a look at some of the settings. So probably the most important one for this part is allow part rotation. Now if I set that to be at 90 degrees, what it will do, it will just literally change at 90 degrees to see if it can find the best fit. So if we try that, you can see that straight away it's only done 1 star on that second sheet. So already it's better. So if I go back, you can see that it's rotating these stars by 90 degrees and trying to get them all in there. Okay, it won't make any difference for these bottom ones because it doesn't really want to rotate them anyway. Now if I were to put this quite low, what would happen is it would allow the part to rotate in these steps and try to find the best fit. So if I were to change that to something like, let's say 10, and see what that does, you can see that it's all been nested on 1 sheet now, because these stars can rotate around quite freely in 10-degree steps and try to find the best fit. Now, you can also do mirrored parts. So at the moment, all that it's doing is rotating this around. But what if I had a part that could get in another area, but because I'm locking it, it won't allow me to go in there. All that I'm allowing it to do is do a part rotation. If I do mirrored parts, then that would allow it to be flipped and it might get in there. You've also got allow parts in parts. So this is quite useful if, say, for instance, you have, say, a letter 0 or a letter P, let's say, for instance. So the internal area, normally this would be scrap. So what this allows you to do is nest something that fits within that internal part that would normally be scrap. You've also got guillotine cuts. So these basically, if you're doing something that's all straight, it will go across the part and come back and just cut it straight off. Now, what I want to show you is the grouping. At the moment, this doesn't really matter because there's no internal shapes in these parts. Okay, so that's what it's really for, or if you want to maintain layers, if you want to machine them afterwards. So if I undo that, and let's say, for instance, I put a few shapes on the inside of these. Let's say that I've got this star with this square in the center, and there's also, let's say, a couple of circles in this one. Okay, now if I were to try to nest this at the moment and then select nest, what's happened here is that it's done what I've done previously, but it's also given me an extra square and also two circles. Okay, so what's happened is it's just nested those as separate entities, and it also hasn't taken into account that I want 26 of them. Okay, so what I can do is undo that, and then let's select them all, and then you've got group inside and outsides of shapes on nesting. So if we try that and select that, now what's going to happen is that because you can see these numbers on here, because the circles and the square only have one in there, so I'm basically saying that I only want one of those, it's going to use that rather than the 26 or the 10. So if I select nest, you can see it's nested those, but it's only given me one copy. Okay, so what I need to do is undo that, and then the only option that I have is to do all parts. So if I were to say 10 and then nest, it will give me 10 copies. Okay, now that's not really what I want to do. I want to create 26 and 10, and I can't do that at the moment. So if I undo that, and then rather than group inside and outsides of shapes on nesting, I select them and select group now. Now what this does, it basically just groups them together. Okay, and then this allows me to select how many that I want. Now one word of warning is if you've got this all parts selected, so say that I've got 10 and I enter a selected part, a number, this 10 will actually become a multiplier. Okay, so if I were to say that I want 10 of those, and then select that I want, let's say 6 of those. So now, if we select all of those, you can see that there's 10 of the stars and 6 of the squares. So if I select nest, it gives me all of these sheets. Now, that's not what I wanted. As I said before, must watch out for these all parts. So that's actually a multiplier. So because I typed in 10 and 6, it's basically times that by 10. So you can see that I've got 10 and 6. So it actually gave me 160. So let's put that back to 1. And select both of those. And now if I nest, you can see that it's given me 6 of the rectangles and 10 of the stars. Now you can also group these afterwards, and you can also create a leftover material vector. So what this does, it will basically give me a vector going around the outside of this that I can save, and I can use it later for, let's say that I wanted to cut some parts out here. Okay, so let's do more of a real world example now. So if I close this, and then let's delete all of those parts. So let's take a look at the top under Untitled, And you can see that I've got a 2x4 sheet. Now I've got a drawing that I created of basically some end panels for a synthesizer that I've done. I've just done them out of 1/2 inch plywood. So what I'm going to do is bring those in, but they've also got layers with them. So if I go to vector and import, and then you can see that I've got this file, which is a DXF file. And importantly, I want to preserve the layers, okay? And select open. What that will do, it will give me the layers that were created with this. I'll just center that in the model. I'm not too fussed about that. And specify the units that the file was created in. So this was actually created in millimeters. So what it's going to do, it's automatically going to convert this for me and put it into inches, so it's the right size for this. So I know that it was done in millimeters. So if I select OK, you can see that it's brought these end cheeks or these end panels into the software. Now if I deselect those and zoom in, you can see that they're different colors. Okay, so if I open up the vector layers, you can see that I've got a synth pocket, I've got 5mm holes, and I've got an outside profile. Now what I want to do is machine these out of this sheet, but I thought to myself, well, I can make a few copies of these and maybe sell them. So I'm going to try and get as many copies as I can out of this sheet. Okay, so what I'm going to do is select all of those and go to nesting. Let's use the same tool diameter. Let's maybe give it a 1 inch clearance, and let's give it 1/2 inch edge clearance. I'll allow part rotation of 10 degrees, allow mirrored parts, and just for the sake of it, allow parts in parts. Use the model as a boundary, and what I'm going to do is select group now, okay, because I want to group these right now so it saves the layers afterwards, and it will also group all of these internal parts to the boundaries. So if I select group now and then select them, and I'm going to do all parts, let's just say 100, because I want these to go over the whole of one sheet. I'm just going to machine one sheet. Select nest, go back to sheet 1, and you can see that I've got all of these parts. Let's select all of them, and I'm going to select ungroup all. And then you can see that they've all been put back onto their original layers. Okay, so you need to select them and select ungroup all. Now I'll do that again because I want to change the spacing on this. Okay, so if I undo that, so I'll go back to there, and you can see that they're still grouped together. Now let's change the spacing. Let's change the toolpath clearance. So let's say I want this to be, let's say 0.25, and the edge clearance, let's do that 0.25, and then nest. Okay, now I can choose which one I want to use. So let's say I could use that, use that, use that. That one looks as though it's being utilized probably the most to my eyes, but it's probably just exactly the same. So let's say that I wanted to use that. So what I can do is select all of those, right click, and then I need to ungroup all. And then that puts them back onto the original layers. So now if I close the nesting tool, what I can do now is start machining this. So I'll just do this really quickly over, let's say, the pocket that I have here. Okay, so if I go to toolpaths and then do an area clearance, rather than selected vectors, I want to do this over a layer. So if I go to the synth pocket, finish depth, let's just make anything up for this. Let's say 1/4 of an inch. Add a tool. Let's use, say, a 1/4 inch end mill. Click select, offset. Now, I'm not too fussed about this. This is just so you can see what happens. Set up my material. Let's say that it's 1/2 inch material. And let's calculate that. And you can see that it's machining over the whole sheet. Okay, I haven't had to select these because I selected the layer rather than the vectors. Okay, so if I were to simulate that now, you can see that it's created all of those pockets for the synth. Okay, so that's how the nesting works.